And to our final story. A new military alliance is taking shape amid bubbling tensions in the Horn of Africa. Saudi Arabia, Somalia and Egypt are looking for stability. But could a new military bloc create further cracks in the wider region? Saudi Arabia has concluded talks with Egypt and Somalia on the formation of a new military bloc, with reports suggesting it is part of efforts to curb the United...
When on August 27th, 2 Egyptian military planes landed in Somalia's capital, it ruffled feathers 1,000 kilometers away in Addis Ababa. The planes, delivering military aid, marked Egypt's first significant military engagement in Somalia in decades.
Somalia receives a lot of military equipment and donations. This one is significant just because it's coming specifically from Egypt and the timing of it. It came at a time where there's high...
Why is Saudi Arabia building military alliances and why should the rest of the world care? Saudi Arabia is negotiating new defense and security arrangements with Egypt and Somalia, including talks about a formal military coalition focused on Red Sea security. The goal? Tighter coordination around the Bab el-Mandeb, one of the world's most critical shipping routes.
Somalia and Saudi Arabia has a very, very long and historical relationship because of the proximity of our geographic locations and because of the common values that we had, Islamic religion, the way of life, the Arab values and culture, of course. So there is a lot of issues that link Saudi Arabia and together. The 21st century global is another challenge that makes us get together. We have common enemy, like the extremists, like the terrorists, like the fundamentalism on the wrong direction. Since we all have a common base of Islam, our heritage has always been linked together. So that is the background that we are coming from. As of now, always Somalia has been in a difficult situation for the last 3 decades. And Saudi Arabia has always been with Somalia for all these 3 decades in terms of humanitarian, in terms of security, in terms of global politics and diplomatic support provided to Somalia. That is the level of our relationship. And today, and this time, as under the leadership of His Highness Prime Minister and the Crown Prince, His Highness Mohammed bin Salman, and under the leadership of His Majesty King Salman, we are improving every day. There is a new progress, our relationship, new confidence, new relations, new areas of investment. Somalia is a country that is coming out of long-term conflict. We went into a war with the terrorists, as Saudi Arabia did sometime in the past and succeeded. There is no better place than Saudi Arabia to seek advice and experience in the war against the terrorism. So that is the connection that we have, number one. Number two, Somalia is recovering. We are coming out of the difficult era. Now Somalia is open. Somalia has a strategic interests in it globally. And similarly, there is no better place than generally the Gulf states and then Saudi Arabia as well, as a priority partner and strategic. We have a very strategic dialogue and discussions going on. So Somalia and Saudi Arabia is linked together forever.
The sudden shift in security alignments around the Horn of Africa has sent quiet shockwaves through global power centers. At the heart of this unease is the deepening military cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Somalia, a relationship that signals far more than routine defense assistance. It reflects a strategic recalibration that threatens to redraw influence lines across one of the world's most sensitive maritime corridors, and it explains why Washington is watching events unfold with growing anxiety. For years, Somalia was treated as a fragile space where external actors focused narrowly on counterterrorism, humanitarian stabilization, and maritime security. That narrow framing is now breaking down. Somalia's location alone makes it impossible to ignore its strategic value. It's at the junction of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, adjacent to shipping lanes that carry a significant share of global energy supplies and commercial goods. Any shift in security arrangements along this corridor has immediate consequences for energy markets, naval planning, and diplomatic leverage. Saudi Arabia's interest in Somalia is not sudden, but its timing is decisive. The kingdom has spent the last decade transforming its foreign policy posture, moving from quiet checkbook diplomacy to more assertive regional engagement. Maritime security has become central to that shift. As a leading energy exporter, Saudi Arabia depends on uninterrupted shipping through nearby sea lanes. Any instability near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Gulf of Aden, or the Western Indian Ocean directly threatens its economic lifeline. Strengthening security partnerships with coastal states is no longer optional. It is a strategic necessity. Somalia offers something few other partners can: geography, political openness to new alliances, and a long coastline that directly overlooks critical routes. By deepening military cooperation with Somalia, Saudi Arabia gains influence over the security environment near some of the most congested and vulnerable maritime passages in the world. This cooperation is reportedly focused on training, logistical support, coastal surveillance, and institutional rebuilding of security forces. While these elements may sound technical, their implications are geopolitical. Washington's unease stems from what this cooperation represents rather than any single agreement. For decades, the United States shaped security frameworks in the Horn of Africa, either directly or through partners. Military assistance, intelligence coordination, and naval presence were tools used to ensure freedom of navigation and to counter threats ranging from piracy to extremist violence. The assumption underlying this approach was that no other major power in the region would establish an independent security architecture that could operate outside Washington's influence. That assumption is now under strain. Saudi Arabia is not a marginal actor. It is a regional heavyweight with financial resources, diplomatic reach, and a growing defense industry. When it invests in a security partnership, it does so with long-term intent. In Somalia's case, this intent aligns with broader regional ambitions: stabilizing the Red Sea corridor, countering rival influences, and securing trade and energy routes that underpin Saudi economic transformation. For Washington, the concern is not that Somalia is receiving support, but that the source and structure of that support reduce American leverage. Military cooperation creates habits of coordination, shared doctrine, and trust. Over time, these relationships shape how a country votes in international forums, who it consults during crises, and whose priorities it considers when making security decisions. If Somalia's security sector becomes increasingly aligned with Saudi frameworks, Washington's ability to steer outcomes diminishes. The context of global power competition intensifies this anxiety. The United States is already managing stretched commitments across multiple regions. The Middle East is undergoing rapid realignment, with traditional alliances becoming more transactional and less predictable. Africa, once treated as a secondary theater, is emerging as a space where influence can no longer be taken for granted. In this environment, any sign that a key coastal state is diversifying its security partnerships triggers alarm. Somalia's own calculations are central to this story. After decades of instability, the country's leadership is seeking partnerships that promise tangible capacity building rather than temporary fixes. Military cooperation with Saudi Arabia is framed as part of a broader effort to rebuild institutions, secure borders, and assert sovereignty over territorial waters. For Somalia, this is about agency. Relying exclusively on Western assistance often came with conditions, delays, and shifting priorities tied to distant political debates. A partnership with a regional power that shares immediate security interests offers an alternative path. This does not mean Somalia is turning away from the West. Rather, it is signaling that it will no longer be dependent on a single security patron. That diversification is precisely what makes Washington uncomfortable. Influence thrives on exclusivity. When a partner has options, leverage declines. The fear in Washington is that Somalia's example could inspire other African coastal states to pursue similar strategies, accelerating a broader erosion of Western dominance in regional security affairs. The military dimension of the Saudi-Somalia relationship also intersects with economic and diplomatic layers. Security cooperation often paves the way for infrastructure investment, port development, and trade agreements. By helping secure coastlines and maritime approaches, Saudi Arabia positions itself as a partner in Somalia's economic revival. Ports, logistics hubs, and shipping services are natural extensions of maritime security collaboration. Each new project deepens interdependence and further anchors the relationship. From Washington's perspective, this convergence of security and economics is particularly concerning. Control or influence over ports and trade routes has always been a strategic priority. While the United States maintains naval superiority, it understands that long-term influence depends on access, partnerships, and local consent. If regional powers shape the political and security environment around key ports, naval dominance alone cannot guarantee influence. There is also a symbolic dimension that should not be underestimated. Saudi Arabia's engagement challenges the narrative that stability in fragile states must be brokered by Western powers. It suggests that regional actors can take the lead in addressing security challenges that directly affect them. This shift undermines the moral authority Washington has traditionally claimed as a global security guarantor. When regional solutions gain credibility, external oversight becomes less welcome. Critics in Washington worry about standards, transparency, and alignment of values. They argue that new security partnerships may prioritize short-term stability over long-term governance reforms. Yet beneath these concerns lies a more fundamental fear: loss of strategic primacy. The reality is that Washington's ability to dictate the terms of engagement in regions like the Horn of Africa is waning, and the Saudi-Somalia military cooperation is a visible marker of that trend. The reaction in policy circles has been cautious but telling. Public statements emphasize support for Somalia's sovereignty and welcome contributions to regional stability, while private discussions focus on how to remain relevant in a rapidly changing environment. This duality reflects a recognition that outright opposition would be counterproductive. Pressuring Somalia to limit its partnerships could push it further away. Instead, Washington is forced to adapt, recalibrating its approach to engagement. At a deeper level, the anxiety stems from uncertainty about the future balance of power. The Red Sea and the Western Indian Ocean are becoming theaters of intensified competition. Energy transitions, supply chain reconfiguration, and geopolitical rivalries are converging in these waters. Any actor that helps shape the security architecture here gains disproportionate influence over global trade flows. Saudi Arabia understands this. Somalia is beginning to understand it too. The military deal, whether formalized in sweeping agreements or built incrementally through cooperation, is less about weapons and more about positioning. Training programs, intelligence sharing, and coastal monitoring systems create networks of dependency and trust. Over time, these networks influence how crises are managed and whose interests are prioritized. Washington's panic is rooted in the realization that these networks may no longer center on American leadership. For Somalia, the stakes are high. Successfully leveraging new partnerships could accelerate state building and economic recovery. Mismanaging them could entangle the country in regional rivalries. The challenge lies in balancing relationships without becoming a proxy battleground. Saudi Arabia's approach, at least publicly, emphasizes partnership rather than dominance, but power dynamics are never static. What makes this moment particularly significant is its broader implication for Africa's role in global politics. African states are increasingly asserting their right to choose partners based on national interest rather than historical alignment. The Saudi-Somalia military cooperation fits this pattern. It reflects a continent-wide shift toward strategic autonomy, where countries seek diversified relationships that maximize benefits and minimize dependency. Washington's response to this shift will shape its future influence. Panic, if it leads to heavy-handed pressure or dismissive rhetoric, could accelerate disengagement. Adaptation, on the other hand, could open space for more balanced partnerships that respect African agency. The outcome is not predetermined, but the window for adjustment is narrowing. In the end, the story is not about one deal or one country. It is about a changing world order where regional powers play more assertive roles and traditional hegemons must learn to share influence. Saudi Arabia's military cooperation with Somalia is a symptom of this transformation. Washington's anxiety is understandable, but it is also a sign that the old playbook no longer applies. As ships continue to pass through the narrow straits near Somalia's coast, carrying the lifeblood of the global economy, the strategic importance of who helps secure those waters will only grow. Partnerships formed today will shape decisions made in future crises. For Saudi Arabia and Somalia, the calculus is clear: shared security. Interests demand closer cooperation. For Washington, the challenge is to navigate this new reality without clinging to assumptions that no longer hold. The panic, therefore, is less about immediate threats and more about long-term trajectories. It is about the realization that influence must now be earned through respect, responsiveness, and genuine partnership rather than assumed through legacy dominance. In that sense, the Saudi-Somalia military relationship is not just making Washington nervous. It is forcing a reckoning with a world that is moving decisively beyond old hierarchies. Chatgapt can make mistakes, check important info. The longer this realignment unfolds, the clearer it becomes that Washington's anxiety is rooted in a deeper structural shift rather than a single policy setback. What is emerging around Somalia is a new pattern of security cooperation in which regional powers take the lead, shape priorities, and define outcomes according to their own strategic needs. This pattern challenges the long-standing assumption that stability in strategically vital regions must flow through Western-designed frameworks. Saudi Arabia's engagement with Somalia fits into a broader Red Sea and Indian Ocean strategy that has been quietly taking shape for years. The kingdom has invested heavily in ports, logistics corridors, and maritime infrastructure across neighboring regions. Military cooperation is the missing pillar that ties these investments together. Without secure coastlines and reliable local security forces, economic projects remain vulnerable. By helping Somalia strengthen its maritime and defense capabilities, Saudi Arabia is effectively safeguarding its wider regional interests. This approach resonates with Somali leaders who have grown wary of dependency-driven assistance models. Decades of externally led interventions produced mixed results, often prioritizing short-term crisis management over durable capacity. The appeal of a partnership that emphasizes training, institutional development, and shared regional interests is therefore strong. It allows Somalia to frame security not as a perpetual emergency requiring outside supervision, but as a sovereign responsibility supported by mutually beneficial alliances. Washington's discomfort also reflects a loss of narrative control. For years, Western capitals framed themselves as indispensable stabilizers in fragile states. The Saudi-Somalia cooperation complicates that narrative by demonstrating that non-Western actors can step into meaningful security roles without triggering immediate collapse. Even if challenges remain, the symbolism alone is powerful. It suggests alternatives exist, and that African states are no longer confined to a narrow menu of partners. Another layer of concern lies in the cumulative effect of similar developments across the continent. Somalia is not an isolated case. Across Africa, governments are diversifying defense partnerships, exploring South-South cooperation, and asserting greater control over strategic assets. Each instance may appear manageable on its own, but together they point to a gradual erosion of Western primacy. For policymakers in Washington, the Saudi-Somalia military deal is one more data point confirming a trend they can no longer ignore. This does not mean the United States is being excluded entirely. American naval power, intelligence capabilities, and diplomatic reach remain formidable. However, relevance increasingly depends on adaptability. The era when influence could be assumed based on past dominance is fading. In its place is a competitive environment where partnerships must deliver visible value and respect local priorities. Somalia's willingness to engage Saudi Arabia reflects a calculation that regional partners may sometimes move faster and align more closely with immediate needs. The risk for Washington is responding defensively rather than strategically. Viewing every new partnership as a zero-sum loss can lead to overreaction, pressure tactics, or disengagement. Such responses often backfire, reinforcing perceptions that Western involvement is conditional and self-serving. A more constructive approach would acknowledge Somalia's right to diversify its relationships while seeking areas of complementarity rather than competition. For Somalia, the path ahead requires careful navigation. Balancing relationships among multiple powerful partners is never simple. Military cooperation brings benefits, but it also carries obligations and expectations. Maintaining autonomy will depend on transparent governance, clear national priorities, and an ability to prevent security partnerships from becoming instruments of external rivalry. Success would position Somalia as a confident regional actor rather than a passive arena for competition. Saudi Arabia, for its part, is aware that its credibility depends on outcomes. If its engagement contributes to genuine capacity building and regional stability, it strengthens its claim as a responsible security partner. If it is perceived as purely self-interested or destabilizing, resistance will grow. The kingdom's challenge is to align its strategic ambitions with Somalia's long-term development goals, ensuring that cooperation is seen as partnership rather than patronage. At the global level, this episode underscores a broader transition toward a multipolar security order. Power is no longer concentrated in a single center, and influence is increasingly distributed among regional actors with localized interests. In such an order, the ability to build coalitions and respect sovereignty becomes more important than sheer military might. The Saudi-Somalia relationship is an early indicator of how this new landscape may function in practice. Washington's panic, therefore, is less about losing Somalia and more about confronting a future in which it must compete rather than command. This is an uncomfortable adjustment for any long-established power. Yet history suggests that those who adapt to change retain relevance, while those who resist it risk marginalization. The Horn of Africa is becoming a testing ground for this lesson. In the coming years, the success or failure of Somalia's security partnerships will be closely watched. If improved maritime security, reduced vulnerability, and stronger institutions follow, other states will take note. Regional-led security models could gain momentum, reshaping how stability is pursued across key trade corridors. If problems emerge, critics will argue that Western oversight remains essential. Either way, the experiment is underway. What is certain is that Somalia is no longer content to be defined solely by its vulnerabilities. By engaging Saudi Arabia on military and security matters, it is asserting its strategic relevance and agency. That assertion alone alters the balance of conversations in global capitals. Washington's unease reflects an awareness that influence now flows through negotiation and respect rather than default authority. In conclusion, the Saudi Arabia-Somalia military cooperation is making Washington panic not because it poses an immediate threat, but because it signals a long-term shift in how power, security, and partnership are organized. It highlights Africa's growing confidence in choosing its allies, regional powers' readiness to assume greater responsibility, and the diminishing effectiveness of old hierarchies. The world around the Horn of Africa is changing, and those who fail to adjust will find themselves reacting rather than leading.